want to get Michelle's story out there, and her message is very important. But it's sad that unfortunately there's no happy ending at the end of her story. And it does feel like, I was thinking of this earlier today, that I feel like a patient living with EHE, my only fear with this story is that it would set fear into them of like the possibility of this happening to them. But then it's important to share this story, because what if maybe a step that went wrong for Michelle could be avoided in future with a patient, and maybe hopefully the goal is to prevent someone from experiencing what she did. So that's why I just feel it's very important that I do share the story, despite it not being a very happy one. And as a family, I think more so me than anybody else was really clinging on to this hope that she would be like the other people I've heard about. And it was amazing to hear the positive stories in the midst of her diagnosis and everything. And it was really the only thing that kept us going as a family, was to hear those positive stories, because there was not much else to be hopeful for. And without those, I don't know how we would have coped. But at the same time, did it give us this sense of false hope? Probably, but that's not on the people sharing their stories. That was just their stories. And unfortunately, it wasn't the case for her. But we just really hoped it would be. I always think, like, I've always thought with other family members, and we've had a lot of them that have passed, and I've always thought, everything happens for a reason, and that happened because of this, and it was just their time to go. But Michelle's case, with just the how horrible of a disease it is, it just feels like she was stolen from us. And there's no explanation that God could ever give, if I came face to face with him, on why she had to suffer the way she did. It just seems so cruel, and it's very hard to even I think we're actually traumatized, to be honest, from what we witnessed with her battling this disease. And if I could just prevent this happen to anybody else. I'd like to show a photo. So this was my sister Michelle. And Michelle was 52 when she passed. But her whole being of a person, she was so selfless. She was the most selfless person I've ever met. Anytime you'd like see Michelle, whether you were a family member or you just a neighbor that bumped into her on the street or in the shop, she was always in the midst of doing something for somebody else. But there was so many things that she had interest in. Like she got accepted to study theatre when she was young, and she did have some really nice opportunities and dreams and passions, and she was very creative. She always dreamt of writing a book someday. And she was just very talented, a very caring person. That's how I'd really sum her up, is so kind-hearted, so caring, and an extremely hard worker. She probably worked too much and too much for other people. But that's just who she was, and that was just the heart that she had. But unfortunately, when Michelle was only 24, she was in a horrific accident where the wheel of a bus went over her and left her with like horrendous injuries. So after years of hospitalization and operations, she was told early on when she was admitted to hospital that she would lose her leg. And the doctor who was due to retire, who was the main consultant dealing with her at the time, he postponed his plans to retire for a year, and he promised Michelle that he'd save her leg, and he did. So that was a miracle in itself, because they were convinced, you're either going to end up like paralyzed or lose this leg, or we can't save it. Well, he did. So that was a miracle in itself that happened. And she was also told, she had one son at the time, and she was told she'd never, due to the accident, be able to give birth again to another child. And she did. She got pregnant, and she had another baby after that. So that was like a little miracle baby for her as well. So despite the horrendous misfortune that she had with that accident at such a young age, it stole a lot from her. It stole her confidence. It stole her dreams. She unfortunately couldn't take the offer to then study theatre like she had hoped and dreamed of. And it just kind of really set her back a lot. And she also had a bereavement as well close to that time that was a major impact on her life. So things just weren't kind of good. And throughout her life, you know, she was kind of taken advantage of by a lot of people and stuff. So I guess bringing it forward, she in 2013, she actually moved in with us because my grandmother, who was Maggie at the time, she was diagnosed with cancer. And Michelle, being the selfless person that she was, immediately offered to jump in and help my mum. And she moved in and she nursed her right until her last breath. But it was beautiful to see how somebody could just, it was like no matter what was going on, like she just dropped everything to help anyone she could. So I think that that's always going to be the legacy that she has. I guess for the last number of years, I recall Michelle, we'd go on a lot of family holidays when we could, and she'd always kind of suffer quite frequently from migraines all the time, to the point where I said to her, you know, you should really get that checked with the GP. So yeah, we always recall as a family her suffering from vomiting bugs a lot, or what she thought were vomiting bugs, migraines quite frequently, and chest infections that just never seemed to clear with antibiotics. They'd kind of always come back. I guess that was the last couple of years. But the biggest kind of symptoms that we are aware of is last July, Michelle started vomiting for 2 weeks straight, and it got really bad. She was avoiding going to her doctor. She just would always have this expression that we would slag her about, and it was, oh, where's the time? She just never seemed to have any time for herself, but yet she was very quick to have time for everybody else. She would drop whatever it was for anyone that needed help, anyone that needed to be driven to an appointment. Michelle would be there, the first there. She'd be straight to the rescue. But for some reason, when it came to making a doctor's appointment for herself or doing something nice for herself, it just never could fit into her schedule. But my sister had said to her, enough is enough. The vomiting's going on a week or two. You need to go to your doctor. So she did. And the doctor then sent her for an endoscope, which revealed she had a hiatus hernia. So immediately the doctor has assumed that it's most likely due to the hernia, the vomiting. And she's sent home, still not getting better. So he referred her to a gastro surgeon for a consultation, which was because of, I don't know if it's the same in America, it probably is, but the health system's quite a backlog of things. So when she presented in July, her gastro consultant appointment wasn't scheduled until December of 2023. So she had like nearly a 6-month wait for that. Then she had frequent visits back to the GP just to say, is there any way I could be seen sooner, because this hernia is like, it just seems to be getting worse. It started causing her some pain. And he was kind of just, there's nothing we can do. You just have to wait to be called. So she just tried to cope as best she could with the vomiting. And we felt like, because we believed it was a hiatus hernia that was causing the symptoms, so we noticed that she could be fine all day, and then after she'd eat something, straight away, boom, the vomiting would start, the pain would start. So she started trying to restrict her diet by like maybe not eating sugary things or things that would trigger heartburn or anything like that, to try, rule that out. She did suffer for years and years with acid reflux. So she put some of it down to that as well. But our mum had a health scare last September, and her GP had told her to go straight to hospital, that they thought she could possibly be on the verge of having a heart attack. So Michelle being Michelle, by the time I got to the hospital, when I got the call, Michelle was already there. She was there, she was worried, she was comforting her and waiting for test results to come back. It turned out to be a false alarm, luckily, with our mum, and everything was fine. So Michelle drove us back home, and in the car, she started having an attack of what we acknowledged at the time to be like a hernia attack. It was this sudden onset pain and vomiting. Well, she wasn't vomiting in the car, but it was starting. We knew, she needed to get home ASAP because she was going to be sick. So we got home and she was, vomiting uncontrollably in the bathroom. She had severe pain. Her face was red. She felt like she couldn't breathe. So I rang the out of hours doctor because it was now past 6 p.m. on a Friday evening. We spent the whole day at hospital with our mum, and we arranged an appointment that evening then for the out of hours doctor. So she went and she told them, listen, I'm vomiting, I'm having this pain, I suffer with a hernia. I think, it's gotten quite bad. Maybe it could rupture, or we weren't sure. So they gave her a letter to go straight to hospital, which she did. And she was left waiting 12 hours because in Ireland, that's the way our hospital systems are. They're completely overloaded, they're understaffed, they're underfunded, and she just had to wait. So she was hours waiting in pain, vomiting, sick, and really not well. And they did blood tests. They said the blood test came back normal, so they weren't worried about her. They put all her symptoms down to the hernia that the scope had revealed. And they sent her home. So she was really angry because she felt like she'd already spent a full day in hospital with her mum, and then a whole night. She was exhausted spending it in hospital just to be told your blood tests are fine. It's most likely your hernia. You should just go home and rest and speak to your GP and see, can you get a quicker referral to see the gastro surgeon. So that went on, and I started to get concerned because we had booked Michelle turned 50 the year of COVID, and we had to push out a surprise trip to New York by 2 years. So I said, you know what, enough is enough. We can fly now. We booked New York prior to all these hernia symptoms. But New York was like a 3 weeks away at the time. And I said to her, I'm very worried about you going to New York. I don't think you should fly when you're feeling as sick as you do. Maybe we should cancel. Maybe we should postpone. And she was like, no, we're going. You'll lose all the money and stuff. And I was like, but I'd be more worried about if you have a hernia, it's strangling you. Because I'm looking up everything online. A hernia could become, entangled or strangle you or anything like that. So I'm thinking, I'm very worried about her going to New York. It's a long flight. So anyway, she reassured me she'd be okay. And I hadn't seen her then in the 2 weeks leading up to the holiday. So we went on the holiday. She was fine on the flight over. Like, it doesn't seem to be the way she was the last time I seen her. But she had said she was really struggling with the hernia. And the same thing in New York, she could go hours in the day. And, we did all the things. We went around Central Park on bikes. We went for afternoon tea at the plaza in New York. We really went all out, and we made such amazing memories. But we always noticed in the evening time, these hernia, what we thought were hernia attacks, would strike. And we'd keep saying, oh, you shouldn't have had that cake today. That must have triggered your hernia. Or walk around. It's probably a lot of trapped air. Let's get you walking around. And she'd be belching a lot. So she'd say, oh, I feel a little bit better. But one night, it really struck us because Michelle just started sobbing uncontrollably. She said she couldn't bear the pain anymore. It was really getting bad. And we were so taken aback because this is a lady who's experienced extreme pain. This is a lady who, isn't fazed by pain at all. And she's crying. So we know it's really bad. So we were just like, look, as soon as we get home, we need to push for a private appointment. And then the next morning she was feeling a bit better. So we'd go back out. And it was a short enough trip. We were just there for 5 days. So by the last night, our plan was, because it was her birthday on Halloween, So we'd booked for Harry Potter Broadway show, and she was so excited and we went. Now she'd do this thing where she'd keep tapping her leg because the pain seemed to be going. She would describe it like she was being strangled. It was like when the pain would start, it was an onset of she couldn't breathe properly. It was like someone was choking her. The pain would radiate around to her back. It was extreme, like stabbing, like pain, like she was being stabbed millions of times into the stomach, she described it. And it was also like a shooting pain down her leg, which worried her because she had had operations and stuff due to the accident. So she didn't know if there was something going on in her leg that was causing all of these symptoms. She also started doing research herself because on YouTube, she was looking up people's experiences with hiatus hernias. And one man said, you need to find out what the root cause is of a hiatus hernia. Hernias don't usually develop by themselves. There's usually a reason. So get to the core reason you have the hernia. So that kind of started to shed a bit of light for maybe something else is going on. So we went to the Harry Potter show and I could hear her, she'd bang her leg a lot. She'd somehow think if she banged her leg, the pain would go away. It was almost like a comforting thing for her. She'd be rubbing her leg. The pain was just getting worse and worse. And again, on and off. It could last for like an hour, 2 hours, or as she said, when she was at home on her own in her bedroom, it could last hours and hours and she'd be just in really bad pain. So we were coming out of the Harry Potter show. I knew she was uncomfortable throughout the show because she was banging her leg, tapping it away. But she really enjoyed the show. But what really took me aback was she grabbed my hand outside the show. And Michelle was never really, she was a very lovable person, but she wouldn't be overly affectionate. And she grabbed my hand and I thought she wanted to tell me something or hold my hand. And I said to her, are you okay? And she said, I can't walk. And when she said I can't walk, the blood just drained from my body because I thought, okay, there's something really, really wrong here. And all the things were going through my head, like, this is our last night. Do we go home? Will she be okay on the plane? Do I bring her to a hospital in New York? But then we're from Ireland. So are we going to come home with like a $20,000 bill? Probably. So your brain is just going, what is this? What is going on? But I knew deep down when she said, I knew deep down there's something seriously, seriously wrong. So we got back to the hotel. I practically carried her back. We got back and I spent about an hour just not giving out to her, but telling her like, this is not normal. We have to, there's no maybe ifs, buts. When we get off the plane, we have to go straight to a private hospital as soon as possible. We're not waiting around anymore. We're not asking your GP their advice anymore. We're not sitting in public hospitals for 12 hours anymore. Enough is enough because you're going to die if we don't get this sorted. Like, that's how bad this is getting. So we went home on the flight. Funnily enough, I'm the person on the flight struggling because I'm a very nervous flyer and my nerves are gone. And she looks at me at one point in the flight and she says, if I can deal with this pain, you can get over this panic attack. And I did. So we got home safe and sound. Thank God the flight seemed easy enough for her. She was able to read a book, didn't seem to disturb her much. It always baffled us the way it would. For hours she could be fine and then all of a sudden this would just start and not be able to stop. So we couldn't get our heads around it either. But as soon as we got home, we kind of not live separate lives, but we live in different areas. So we wouldn't see each other every day. I was texting her every day. I was calling her every day. Have you got a referral yet from your doctor for the private hospital? No, I haven't rang yet. I'm really not feeling up to it. I've been getting sick all morning. And she just was too ill, was the bottom line, to reach out to her doctor. And she wasn't leaving the house. She was cooped up in her room. She was vomiting like 12 hours a day, like constantly vomiting, constantly in pain, moaning in pain at home. And I rang her and I'd hear her saying, oh, I have to go, I have to get sick. And I said to her, now I told you when we're in New York, as soon as we come back, like, this needs to be done. But because of these new GDPR laws, it's very hard for someone else to make a phone call for you to your doctor because you need to have that patient's consent and vice versa. And After about a week of me having to like really hammer the doctor, the GP, for this referral and to get on to the private hospital and arrange an appointment, I arranged an appointment for her with a private gastrosurgeon to see what these stomach issues were regarding this hernia. Finally, rang her to tell her about the appointment. She was very reluctant, despite being as sick as she was. She feared of what the costs would be. But this is also the same lady who would shed out the same amount of money for a coat for her son on holiday. You know, she'd go above and beyond for her family to give them anything they wanted, but for herself, she was always bottom of the pile in her eyes. So I was like, I don't care if you want me to pay for it, I will. We're going, and that's it. There's no more excuses. You're going. So she went to the appointment and she told the symptoms to the doctor, and he straight away was like, this doesn't sound like a hernia to me at all. Straight away, you need to get a scan. So he booked her in. She had the scan. He said, come back in a week and we'll give you the results. She returned a week later and he was like, unfortunately, we found a very large mass on your liver. You need to go straight to the hospital. We could treat you here, but based on what we can see, it's going to cost a lot of money. So go straight to the hospital. Here's the letter, and they will advise you on what to do next. So she went back to the public hospital that she had 2 months before been sent home from, because nothing was wrong with her. Her blood tests were normal. We now know that cancer doesn't show up in a normal blood test. So I don't know why they would even base it off a blood test, or why a doctor who sees a patient complaining of severe stomach pain doesn't think, let's do an x-ray and see what's going on in there, because that's where the pain is. It's not up here where the hernia is, it's down there. Anyway, she finally got the scan. She knew there was a tumor, but they were referring to it as a mass at the time. I know mass tumor can be the same thing. So they were saying you have a large mass on your liver. Go to the hospital. So she went to the hospital. She still had a couple of hours to wait despite having the letter, but not as long. And when they read the letter, they admitted her to a ward straight away. So the ward she was admitted to was a ward for infectious diseases, because for some reason the doctors who examined the x-ray thought it could possibly be TB. So they decided to isolate her in a ward for 2 weeks and conduct TB tests. After the results came back, she didn't have TB. So then they were like, okay, what's next? Next, they determined there could possibly be a case of her having some kind of a parasite, because she had told them she was in Japan earlier that year. She'd been to Japan in April of 2023, and this is now December 2023. And they think maybe she ingested food in Japan and there's some kind of a parasite that's living in her body causing these symptoms. So they do further tests, and after another 2 weeks, they established that no, there's no parasites. So then they pass her over to the oncology team, which then we start worrying, oh no, that doesn't sound good. So the oncology team take over. And by the time the oncology team take over, it's Christmas and everything is shutting down in hospitals. At Christmas, the labs are closing. So we know it's a couple of days away from Christmas. The oncology team are taking over. They will be conducting tests, but we're not going to have the results back until January. So it's just a waiting game, a painful waiting game over Christmas of, does she have cancer or does she not? And if she does, what kind is it? What's going on? We're so in the dark. So they do all the tests and she comes home for Christmas for a couple of hours. She's deteriorating as she's in hospital. She's not getting better. She's worse than what she was when she went in. So every day she seems to be getting a million times worse. So she got out for a couple of hours last Christmas. She didn't really enjoy it. She was asleep mainly for most of the day. She was just happy to be out of the hospital. She was sick of the food. She was sick of the same four walls. She just wanted to be at home and to know what was going on with her, and she couldn't deal with the pain anymore. They had been putting her on medications like Coral, pain relief, and paracetamol, which was slightly helping, but it wasn't great. And then they set her up with a diaphragm pump. That was the only relief that she was able to get. That was a relief for us, because we'd visit Michelle and looking at her screaming in pain, like screaming in pain, really horrendous pain. She described it to me one night like as if a spike was holding her up, like a flaming hot spike was holding her up, and someone was stabbing her all over her body. And I can't imagine a more horrific disease or more horrific symptoms than what she described. And what she described was even more horrific, what we had to witness, to see somebody crying, screaming, moaning in pain. They're in a hospital now. They shouldn't have to feel this much pain. Pleading with God, please just take me. I can't deal with this anymore. Like, the memories of that will really stick with us, to see how much she suffered. But finally, when she got this diaphragm pump, it was like, you know, a blessing that like this was taken, the only thing that could take away this pain. But in the new year, anyway, we finally got the results back, and the doctors confirmed that it was, in fact, a rare cancer, and they needed to send the test to the UK to establish exactly what kind of a rare cancer it was. And then it did come back that it was EHE, because they weren't able to really diagnose it in Ireland by themselves. They said all of the specialists were in the UK. They did say that there was a specialist in St. Vincent's Hospital, but the hospital that she was in didn't really have any doctors that knew much about this kind of a disease, which was very hard as a family to say, like, look at how bad she is, look at the way she's suffering, and you're telling us there's no one here that has ever seen this before. It was very scary, and it did feel quite isolating. But at the same time, we got relief, thinking, well, if it's so rare, maybe there's hope out there, and maybe she won't get the dreaded 6-month diagnosis that a lot of cancer patients do get by the time they're stage 4. So I think just the shock alone of finding out she had cancer, let alone what type it was or the symptoms it was giving her, to hear that she had cancer was just such a shock anyway. But to know that she'd all along thought it was a hernia just was awful, because we kept saying, oh, don't be eating this, or and like she tried to get help. She went to her GP, she went to the hospital, she was turned away. And why nobody, like I said already, could think, look at this woman and look at the way she is, and she's showing you where her pain is, like, just do a scan. Why do people have to fight for scans, you know? Even once we found out then it was EHE that she had, I straight away went into research mode. I wanted to know, what is EHE, what like, I didn't know anything about it. I'd never heard of it. I just knew it was ultra rare, and it was a very long word that not many people in our family could pronounce. So once the doctor said EHE, I was like, okay. I was online, I was reading everything I could find on Google, I was reading medical reviews from doctors. And then I found the EHE support group on Facebook, which was an absolute godsend. I straight away felt comfort knowing that, okay, she's not alone. Other people have been through this. Maybe they have stories of, they had the pain Michelle had, and maybe their doctor prescribed something that can help Michelle, or, you know, my main thing was wanting to know how long she'd live for with it, because that's something the doctors never would mention to us. And I was really eager to know, like, is this something that's going to, you know, make her pass soon, or could she have a long time? And when I seen, like, I think it just said, like, people can live from 5 to 20 years depending on symptoms, that gave me hope. We set up meetings with the oncology team, and they said, as a family, it took weeks to get this meeting. I had to keep emailing the hospital, as annoying as I felt, because I know the nurses there are so hardworking and understaffed and all of that. And I do respect that, and that Michelle wasn't their only patient, but unfortunately, she's the only patient in our world that we cared about. And regardless of whatever else is going on in the world, we just were going up to the hospital and we couldn't see anybody on the cancer ward that was suffering the way she was. And maybe, you know, I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure a lot of people were struggling, but the symptoms that she had just seemed like it really needed to be prioritized. And it felt like everything was just a delay, a constant delay, no communications with the doctors. We'd constantly have to ask questions, and we'd be told the team will be around tomorrow, the team will be around tomorrow. But when they'd come round to Michelle, they wouldn't have an update. They'd just say, how are you feeling today? That was really it. And so I asked for the meeting, and I went, and I had a whole list of questions of, you know, is this treatable? What can you do? Michelle didn't want to be included in the meeting. I think she didn't want to probably face the reality of how serious it was. And to be honest, she was too sick to ask questions or to engage at the time. But I asked all the questions I felt were necessary. Is it treatable? Can you operate? Can you do radiation? Can you do chemotherapy? The answer to everything was no. It was a very quick, short no. We can't radiate on it. We can't give her standard chemotherapy. We can't operate. They said because the tumor was so large on her liver and it was going through her diaphragm into her lung, it was like a tree branch. And in order to operate, it would basically, the operation would most likely kill her or leave her with even more horrendous pain. And they said that they wouldn't recommend, definitely wouldn't recommend that. And I can't remember the reasons they said they couldn't do chemo and radiation, but it was straight away ruled out. The only thing they could offer was a chemo tablet, they called it, which isn't like standard chemo, but it's to slow down the growth. You're probably aware of that. And they said, we'll try that and we'll keep her on the pump. But they did warn us that they needed to get her off this pump, this lifeline pump, because if they don't, it's going to fail her organs. So everything felt like you were getting a solution and it was being taken away from you. It was very hard because we were like, well, do you have an alternative to the pump? And they were saying, we'll try different things. We're going to try. And we just hoped for the best. So I did find a lot of kind of less spoken about things. I came across a story about a patient whose tumor was so large that they got microneedling to try like make the tumor smaller. And I fought for everything I possibly could with the doctors. I was like, can you try the microneedling? Could the chemo tablet possibly shrink the tumor so much that it could disappear? Because I read a story of a lady in the UK who was taking this tablet that's like the gold standard in the UK, but unfortunately it's not available in Ireland. And it shrunk her tumor so much it disappeared. But what the doctor was trying to remind me of is that person's tumor probably wasn't the size that Michelle's was. And, you know, the fact it was going through her diaphragm would explain why she'd have those episodes where she couldn't breathe and the pain was so horrendous. So their hope then was that the best case scenario would be that the chemo tablet will shrink her tumor and then maybe we can discuss other options. And the chemo tablet again went against her because it started to give her really bad cramps and diarrhea, which was very embarrassing for her when she had visitors. She'd be having to run to the toilet. She'd be conscious of, like, you know, having an accident or an odor that might be in the room or anything like that. So it was very embarrassing for her body was really kind of rejecting the chemo tablet. And then her hand started to peel really badly, and they said that was a side effect. So anytime she got a side effect from the chemo tablet, they had to pause the chemo tablet until the side effects went away and then put her back on. And again, it was the same thing. They'd put her on the chemo tablet, she'd get sick, and then they take her off. So that was another vicious cycle that was then happening with the only treatment we were hoping would shrink the problem. So they got the palliative pain team on board who came from the hospice. And once they got involved, I started to get very on edge because I don't like that word palliative, and my family have always associated that with when someone's going to die, that the palliative care team take over. They did reassure us that palliative care teams are in place for patients that are suffering with pain from cancer, and they're there to help, which was nice to hear that there's a more resourceful use for them rather than it just being to comfort someone when they're about to pass, because that's what I was afraid of. So they came on board and they were reassuring us that they would do the best to help her get off this pump and to provide an alternative pain medicine. So she was taken off the pump in hospital, and she then started to get the pain a million times worse. So she was screaming in pain, physically screaming in pain, crying, screaming, moaning, everything. And they'd leave her like that for 2 to 3 days because their hope was that somehow the pain would just magically disappear because of the other painkillers they're giving her in drips, like paracetamol, which is very basic compared to what she's dependent on, which is diphene. They'd give her pumps of Corral. They tried to give her some pain patches, and nothing was working at all. And anything they were giving her wasn't substantial enough to even justify that it could work. So we couldn't understand what the method was. It was witnessing it was almost like they were just hoping pain was in her head and it would go away. But they'd leave her for 2 or 3 days. And then when they'd realize that actually the pain isn't going away, we'll better give her back the pump, then they'd give it back to her. But Michelle said when they'd give it back to her, it would take so long for it to kick back in. And when it did, it was like her body was going back to the start. It was like she was going backwards instead of forwards in her progress. It was like she felt like when they first gave her the pump, she was building her strength back up because the pain was gone. And when they take it away, it didn't just set her back, but it set her back a million steps because the pain she'd went through was just so much for her body to take. That happened, I'd say, around 4 or 5 times throughout. So she was diagnosed in January and she passed in August. And that let's take the pump away happened, I'm guessing, around 4 or 5 times. They said they were transferring her. There was nothing else they could do in terms of pain management because they had done the trial and error with the taking her off the pump and giving it back. And they then said we need to send her to the hospice for pain management. And when Michelle heard the word hospice, she freaked out because she thought that they were sending her there to pass away. So we had to encourage her that, no, Michelle, they're pain management specialists there, and they're going to try do what the doctors here can't do, get you off this pump, but provide you with a good alternative and not, something basic like paracetamol that isn't going to work. So she went to the hospice, and they also played the trial and error game for a couple of weeks, and nothing, they tried stronger things and nothing would work. So then we came to the agreement with them that she was so depressed with being isolated in a hospital, eating food that she didn't like. We would bring her up food. My sister, who took care of her, was really good. She'd bring her up food every night that she liked, and that would cheer Michelle up. It was always the foods that was a great comfort to her in her such a sad period, but food seemed to be the one thing that could manage to cheer her up even more than a visitor probably. But she loved people being with her at the hospital, but she just really wanted to get out of there. So she went back to live with my sister, who took care of her in March for a couple of weeks. And then she had an episode where she had to be rushed back into hospital. And they had told us that she had been basically poisoned with all the medication that, like the doctor said, might happen. So that kind of explained to us what the doctors were saying, why they were playing this trial like game with taking it back, because they knew that ultimately it would fail her organs. So we understood why they were taking it away, but no good alternative was being provided to manage this horrendous pain. So when she was admitted then to the intensive care unit, they said she developed sepsis, but she also had toxic blood poisoning from all of the medication. So they had to flush everything out and put her on antibiotics for the sepsis. And then she made a recovery and went back into a mainstream ward. But this was something, again, it was a repeated cycle of, she was in hospital for months. We finally brought her home. They asked us to bring her into the hospice to let them try the pain management thing. That didn't work. We brought her home. She gets really sick then and has to go to intensive care. And then once things settle down, she's back home. But that happened about 3 times where she was home for a couple of weeks. When she'd be home, she'd do really well. She'd do much better at home than she did at hospital. She had her pump. No one was disturbing her by taking away medications. It was just, you're on your pump and that's it. And she liked it that way. And she said, you know, if it ends up failing my organs, it fails my organs. I'd rather that than be screaming for the rest of my life in pain. There's no other alternative. If it happens, it happens. And that's the approach that she just forced herself to have, because she had no choice. So after 2 or 3 intensive care admissions, there was one big disruption when she went into hospital. She developed a bowel obstruction from all of the medication, and we only found out afterwards that she actually had passed away, and they brought her back. Again, they never communicated this to us until months later. A doctor never seemed to be able to just sit us down and say, listen, this is what's going on. It was always, a doctor will get back to you, a doctor will call you, and it would never happen. So I'd say the second last time she was in hospital with another infection, her legs had all swelled out, her stomach had swelled out like a brick. And we had reported to the nurse, like, look at her stomach, there's something going on. And only then did they jump in and say, oh, you're right, something is going on. So it was a lot of cases where we were like, are we the doctors or are you? Because we seem to be the ones that are acknowledging when something is going on with her before you do. So anyway, that evening, my sister had been leaving the hospital, my sister that was taking care of her. And she'd said something to the nurse, like, call me if there's anything wrong, and we'd be straight up. And the nurse had said, oh, we know, and we know that it's DNR, and as in do not resuscitate. And my sister said, what are you talking about? And she said, it says on her file that if anything happens, we're not to resuscitate her. Is that not what you asked for? And we were like, absolutely not. So there was a huge argument between my mum and the main oncologist, who she demanded to see, of who wrote do not resuscitate on her chart. And Michelle had always, from the beginning of her journey, said, I will fight this till the end, till my last breath. I'm not giving up. I don't want to give up. I want to live, whatever it takes, whatever my body has to go through. I won't give up. And the doctors had then sat down and explained to us that they felt like there was no more hope for Michelle, and that it's not worth putting her body through any more pain, so that if for some reason maybe her organs start to deteriorate, they just won't resuscitate if she passes. And we had the argument with them that that was not their decision to make. That was not what the patient wanted. That's not what the family wanted. And even if they saw fit that that should have been the case, why would they not discuss it with us and with Michelle before making that decision without anybody being aware of that? Was just insane. So we started to be very wary then of her team because of that, because they were making decisions and not communicating them with us. So that was very frightening. And it started to look like they didn't have much hope that she would be able to overcome this. She did get home for another couple of weeks towards the end. So I got married in June, and unfortunately, she wasn't able to go to the wedding. The week of the wedding, she had another side effect from being put back on the chemo tablet. She'd really bad diarrhea, and it just wasn't possible for her to be there. And it was very upsetting for me and for her, because she felt like if her care had been managed a bit better, and if the game of taking away the pump hadn't happened, that maybe, you know, she would have been well enough for it. But then, as we'd seen with the intensive care admissions, her body was, not able for the medication. So we understood the doctor's point that if she doesn't get off this pump, it will fail her organs. But also, we felt like, what quality of life does she have in this hospital in pain with no alternative? And we're just going round and round in circles at this point. And it's kind of the same story. She's home, she's back, she's home, she's back. And there was no kind of long period of her to have a good time at home. She did get home when I was on honeymoon. She got out of the hospital for a couple of weeks, and I'd say she had about 3 weeks, and she was getting better, her walk. Like, she appeared to be getting better. She was walking around a lot more. She was upbeat. She was talking about things, watching movies. Again, had her pump and stuff like that. So she kind of got about 3 or 4 good weeks, and then another intensive care admission. This time it was an infection that they couldn't identify this time. They said they didn't know if it was sepsis or pneumonia, as it wasn't showing up as either, but they knew it was some kind of a chest infection that wasn't clearing. So they tried her with antibiotics. And the week that this was happening was in the start of August, and we were scheduled to go to Galway. Michelle was so excited about going to Galway. It was she said, I missed everything else. I really don't want to miss going on this trip to Galway. And we were going up to the hospital, and every day there kind of wasn't any update from the doctors on her being let out, and no update on the chest infection clearing. So I had asked one of the oncologists, Michelle was complaining that she felt like she had fluid on her lungs. And I said to the doctor, could you do a scan on her lungs? Because she keeps saying she feels like there's fluid on her lungs, just to be sure, because I'd be worried that she'd suffocate or smother. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I know you're a doctor, you know better than me and all of this, but could we just get it checked? And he kind of pawned me off very quickly, like, we know what we're doing. We've done tests. We have her on antibiotics. Don't be worrying. So we were like, okay, and going up every day. And then it was like 2 days away from us going to Galway. And my mum was saying, I really don't want to tell her, like, that she won't be able to go. It doesn't seem like the doctors are discharging her. And then we went up the day before Galway thinking like, oh, this is going to be sad because we're going to have to stay. Oh, here's another thing you're missing out on. And she jumped out of bed. I don't know where she got the energy from. She flew past us and went to the toilet. And when she came out, she said, the doctor said I can go home. I can go to Galway. And we were like, what? Really? They didn't tell us. And she was like, yeah, they said I can go out. I'm on my antibiotic, and that was it. So we were like, really like blown away. And to see the difference in her was just amazing. It was like the first time we'd ever seen her with this much energy and feeling so good. Because I had been on a day appointment with her 4 weeks previous when they decided to keep her in. And she had this look in her eyes like the lights had gone off. And she said to me, can I ask you something? And I said, what? She said, do I look like I don't have any fight left in me? Like, does my eyes look like I've given up? And honestly, the answer I was thinking in my brain was yes, it did look like the lights were off, but I was never going to say that to her. I was never going to let her give up or admit that, she looked like she didn't have much left in her. So I was like, absolutely not. You're stronger than anybody I know. You're going to get through this. And she was like, good, good. And then we chatted about a lot of things. And, she said to me, it's only a matter of time before these admissions, one of them is gonna kill me. And I said, don't be saying that. And she was like, you have to face facts. Look at how many times I've been admitted to intensive care. It's only a matter of time before the next infection wipes me out. Or so I just could never have that conversation with her. I said to her, like, I can't imagine a world that you're not in, so we're not having this conversation. So we went to Galway as a family. We had a great week. She got to spin the wheel in a casino, a place. We played bingo, which was one of Michelle's favorite hobbies to do. She never made much time for it again because she was always too busy looking after other people. But we played bingo and we talked and we had dinners, and it was just a really nice week. And looking back, it's like that was our last goodbye week. And we went home and she went back to my sister's house and me and my mum came home and we all tested positive to COVID when we came home. And then I panicked and I thought, oh, she said she didn't feel well down there, but it didn't affect her too badly. And we'd rang the hospice and said to them she feels unwell, and they faxed down an antibiotic. So that seemed to clear whatever was going on. But it seemed like, again, I said that we were surprised by the hospital agreeing to discharge her when they did. Um, because her infection that they didn't know what it was still evidently there, and she was never really properly treated for whatever it was. So we did feel like they rushed to let her out of hospital, and maybe part of them thought this woman has missed out on so much. Maybe she was telling them about Galway and they felt bad for her. So I am grateful we had that week in Galway. But when we came back and we tested positive, we all had symptoms, but Michelle didn't. And her line was quite faded. And she said, well, I feel fine. And then a week passed, and finally we were able to go down and visit her because we were worried that maybe she did have COVID and gave it to us, but we don't want to infect her again. So we went down when we knew we were negative. And she kind of made jokes about how could you all be so sick and I'm the one with cancer and I'm not even that phased about the COVID. And so that was it. And I told her like I'd been on to a cancer society place in Ireland who they're really good and they do funding for cancer patients so that they can do a beauty day. And they asked me would Michelle like to be their model on the day, and they do makeup on her and show other cancer patients, you know, how to do their makeup if they're struggling with the effects of chemotherapy and stuff like that. So she got really excited that this you know, this place really wanted her to be a model, and she was blown away and she was over the moon. And I said to her, you know, we'll we'll do that soon, and we'll make other plans to maybe you can get into that bridesmaid dress, because she'd made hints to me like, oh, I missed the wedding but my dress is still there, maybe I could put it on. And I said, oh, what would we do if you put on the dress? So, and she's maybe you could put on yours and we could still get photos. So she had all those hopes to do all those things, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm the very over the top person in the family. So I was imagining like I'll get a photographer out and we'll go to the location I got married and we'll try do it all again in some way to include her. So I was trying to piece together little ways that I could, you know, bring back the magic to her and make plans for her to be hopeful for. And then my sister, who was taking care of her, told us then on the Saturday night that she had to call an ambulance. Michelle was unable to lift her head from her pillow. Her energy had really deteriorated and she was very concerned. So she went in and went straight into intensive care. And this time we knew from the get-go it was very different to all the previous intensive care admissions. When we went in to visit Michelle in intensive care, she was sedated. They hadn't told us she was sedated. We just could see the tube going down her throat, and all of the machines that were multiplied by 10 to what she'd been on previously. So it was she looked very peaceful, but it was scary to see that there was a lot of obviously support being given to her, and we weren't being told why that was. So I asked the nurse, you know, what's going on? Because there was never a doctor around anytime you go to hospital to talk to. So what's the update? Has she got sepsis again? Does she have pneumonia this time? What infection is it this time? And she said, oh, you just need to speak to the doctor. So I was like, well, where is the doctor? Because every time I come up, there's nobody here. And she said, they'll call you tomorrow. And I said, you know, please make sure they do. I've been told this story so many times and it goes weeks without any update. And looking at her, we really need to know why she's sedated and what's going on here. So I thought maybe they sedated her because maybe they took the pump away again and she's probably in a lot of pain and they didn't want, you know, to have to let her go through that. So we went up the following day and the oncologist, the main oncologist came down and all of the nurses were sitting there in the meeting and they basically said, you know, she's really deteriorated. She has a sac of fluid that's built up on her lung, in a pocket of her lung. That's most likely due to long COVID that could have been there weeks or maybe months. And also her kidneys aren't functioning properly. So we were kind of like, oh gosh, so COVID's obviously caused this, and what can be done from here? So they had said in the nicest way possible that either she will improve or she won't. We've seen Michelle be at this stage before where we think she's not going to make it, and she bounces back. And they said, but it's unlikely that she will bounce back this time. And that was a shock, because looking at her, I thought she looked worse at previous admissions to hospital. And I thought if she could get over those, she can get over this. She's a strong person. Maybe the doctors are just giving us the worst case scenario. She should, like, I just hoped, I was still clinging on to hope she'll be okay. So they said, come back up tomorrow, and hopefully by then her kidneys will be working again, and we'll go from there. So we went up again the following day, and it was the same story. The kidneys are still not working. In fact, they've gotten worse. And if they don't improve, there's a chance that they may fail. And if they do, we have dialysis on standby. So straight away, my sister, who looks after her, who's very much aware of all the medication Michelle needs and how this goes, the alarm bells started ringing in her brain, and she was thinking, wait, if they put her on dialysis, there's no way she'll ever get that pump back again, because the two can't go together. And she said, what about the pump? She kept saying, what about the pump? Because the thing we feared the most was seeing Michelle scream in pain. And they kept kind of dismissing talking about the pump. And they were like, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. So I think they knew she wasn't going to make it, and there was no need to talk about the pump anymore because she's at the end. But they weren't yet telling us it was the end. So we're so like, okay, well, if she gets dialysis, that's, I'm sure she can do it, but she'll need the pump, and we know that's not possible with dialysis. So we're just fearing the worst. And then finally, the third meeting that we had with them, they said that they tried everything they could to get the fluid off her lungs, but unfortunately they couldn't get it off. And her kidneys had failed, and they had put her on dialysis, but whether that started to kick in or not would be another story. So they basically said, we've tried everything we can for Michelle, and the only thing that we can do now is do less. So we were like, do less? Like, what do you mean? Because even though the writing is on the wall, like, you kind of have to hear them say it before you'll even accept or acknowledge it. And they basically were as kind as they could and said, we have to make her comfortable because there's nothing else that we can do. So it's basically a matter of time for you to tell us when you're ready for us to do less, and then we will. So it was kind of a lot to process. And then we were taken aback by that, and we were still hoping, oh, please, maybe our kidneys will work to dialysis and somehow they'll get the fluid off her lung. And then the following day, it was time to decide. And unfortunately, because they couldn't get the fluid off her lung, they said that if they removed the sedation tube, that she would basically just suffocate. And if she didn't have the issue with her lung, she still would have had her kidneys fail. And if she had have been able to get over this and be on dialysis, she never would have been given back her pump. So she would have spent the rest of whatever life she had left screaming in pain. And they said from the get-go, they suspected that she had the EHE 2 years. Now, how they know that, I don't know. I did ask them to explain why they think 2 years, because of how aggressive her symptoms were. I was thinking maybe she has this years and years and didn't know, and now it's just gotten to a point where it's so advanced that that's why this is all happening. Her symptoms are so severe. But they told us that if she survived this if somehow they got the fluid off the lung or the kidneys worked again, that it was still only a matter of a couple of weeks that she had left. But then the following day they established that they tried everything and they couldn't get the fluid off her lung, and we had to make that decision. So we did, and as hard as it was, they had to stop supporting her with the blood pressure medication and the life support machine that they had, which we didn't know at the time was a life support machine. But in the course of those 4 or 5 days where we were in limbo of, is this the end or will she bounce back, I had gotten really upset, and I said to my husband, I was like, oh, I don't want the last time I've seen Michelle to be a little quick chat that we had. I really want to look her in the eyes and to tell her again. I've told her millions of times, but to tell her how much I love her, and just let her know we're there. But we did get that opportunity. Like they took her off sedation the day before she passed, just for an hour or two, and she couldn't talk because of the tube, but she could hear everything we were saying, and she was trying to respond as best she could, and she was nodding her head when I asked her certain things. But that gave me great comfort to let her know, like, we were there with her, we loved her. Even till the end, I was still telling her she was going to get through this and she was going to make it. And because what else can you say? You can't tell somebody, like, you're going to die, they've told us you're going to die and this is goodbye. We wouldn't have wanted to distress her in that way. And I think deep down she knew, because there was a moment where she hugged my mum, and I think, like, she really knew in that moment, the way she hugged her. And when her two sons came to the hospital, um, she cradled them like they were babies in her arms, and it lasted for about 20 minutes where she just kept hugging them and wouldn't let go. And that really, like, identified it for me. Like, she knows. Um, but she did what she said she would do, and she fought, like, right until the very end, and she was so strong and so brave. And even at the end, she, to comfort somebody again, like in the midst of, like, she's going to pass away, and she was still so worried about all of us, and she seen my brother get really upset, and she was trying to tell him, she got the energy to lift herself up, and she was trying to say, I'm going to walk again, I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk. She was trying to comfort him even in her last moments. And that just really shows the spirit that she had right till the end. She was determined to fight. She was determined to comfort her family. She was trying to support us when it's just us that needs to support her in that moment. So I just was so blown away by the strength that she had. And I'm just so sad that she didn't get that happily ever after that she really deserved. But I did, for her funeral, she did wear her bridesmaid dress, because she so wanted to wear it. And as sad as I am, she didn't get to wear it for a happier occasion. I know that if heaven exists, and I really hope it does, that she went up there and she got to be like the belle of the ball, and really, just, I hope she can experience all the love and peace and happiness that she didn't get on this earth. I hope she has that a million times more in the afterlife. Because, as like my brother said, like, she was one in a million, and she had, like, the accident that she had years ago. No one would have survived that. And this one in a million cancer and having a miracle baby. She really was like a super human woman. And the legacy that I want her to leave is that, despite everything being stacked against her with this horrendous, horrific disease, she wouldn't let it defeat her, even though in the end it did. But it didn't defeat her spirit. Nothing could have conquered her spirit or her soul or her love. And she wouldn't let it, anybody going through what she did would lose every aspect of hope that's in their body. They'd turn against it. But she, right till the end, the bracelet that she had on her arm said hope. And that was the thing that she never gave up on. So, like, EHE or cancer, it can destroy families, it can destroy, take a life from someone, but it can't destroy hope, and it can't destroy love. Michelle's story, I hope, as sad as it is, and the struggle that it was, I hope that this story can encourage somebody to whether it's someone that might have symptoms. Like, look after yourself, go to your doctor as soon as you have any symptoms, whether you think they're going to think you're a hypochondriac or you're annoying or whatever it is. You only have one life, and people need to really value that and not ignore your body when it's telling you there's something wrong. Like, go and get it checked. And you know, I hope that it can get someone to catch this disease when it's in the early stages before it progresses to this point. I hope that it can help doctors maybe listen more to the patients, just of really what they're feeling, to be more vigorous in what they check. You know, if you complain of your tooth being sore, the first thing a dentist will do is x-ray the tooth. So it should be the same with your body, which is even more important than losing a tooth, you know. So I really hope that she didn't die and go through all of that pain for no reason. I hope that her story and her struggle can save someone else's life, can change someone else's life, can change a doctor's mind, can inspire a patient to be more you know, look after themselves a bit better, and just really you know, make a change in the world. But I did want to just add the very last thing, to read a quote that reminds me of Michelle. And it said, God saves his hardest battles for his strongest soldiers. And life did leave her with a lot of scars, but don't they say the darkest nights produce the very brightest stars? And her fight is over. I'm sure all the angels were heard ringing their bells. But if you look at the sky, you'll most likely see Michelle casting her spells. And that is the lasting message that I feel. She left a lot of magic in the world, despite living in a lot of darkness. She was the light. She spread a lot of magic in the world. And I will always do my best to continue spreading her magic around the world, because she's made me a better person. I want to help people the way she helped people, even though she didn't, like, in a sense of be able to help EHE patients because she got too sick herself. But her whole life was a testament of care to people. She nursed my grandmother when she was dying with cancer. She was a devoted mother, daughter, sister, friend. She'd do anything for anyone. And I know that if she had have you know, gotten over this battle with EHE, and she had have been fortunate to be able to live somewhat of a normal life, she would have wanted to fight against this and help other people. So that's what I aim to do in her place for as long as I can.